I hope it's recording everything. Maybe so. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Sormag's Writers Cafe, where we share the real writer's life over a cup of friendship, sprinkled with laughter and wisdom. My name is LaShaunda Hoffman, and I'm your host for today. This episode's sponsor is Building Your Readership by LaShaunda Hoffman, a new Kindle book. Are you ready to become a social butterfly? Inside this new episode book, LaShaunda shares 10 ways to start building your readership. Increase your book sales as you learn how to become consistent with your book promotion. Each episode includes action steps to implement to help you become a social butterfly. Check the show notes for the link. Today, sitting at the cafe with me is Miss. I just lost your name all in my head. I just went Kaia Alderson.
Hi.
Oh my God! I just
tell you because
my old lady brain.
I am either.
My brain went. I'm reading it and I'm going. You're not gonna say her name. Say her name, and my tongue is not moving. So, okay, if you listen to the podcast, you don't get to see me act crazy. So just be prepared. The craziness will begin. But Kaia, I am so excited to talk to you about your book. I'll say this before I start. Okay, so me and Kaia are longtime friends. We've known her for a long time. We went to Beverly Jenkins' pajama party, and we were roommates.
Yes, we were.
And she was talking about this book before it was written. And so she was telling me about it. I was like, ooh, this sounds so good. And she was telling about the researches she was doing and everything. And I was like, oh, my God, this sounds so wonderful. And so, all through the year, I was, we talk up, she'd say a little bit about it on social media, what she was doing and everything and stuff. And I was like, yay. And then she showed the cover. I'm like, it's coming together. It's coming, And so I was so excited to see it. And then when it came, I got the audio. I'm going to get the audio. Mm-hmm. I got the Kindle, too. Mm-hmm. I'm going to get the book whenever I see her so she can sign it. So that's how I do the book. But I'm super excited because this book was fantastic. I listened to it as I cooked and washed dishes every night. That was my thing. I'll come home and listen while I'm cooking. And I was telling her off camera that this book took me back to my Navy days. If you don't know, I was in the Navy from 18 to 25. And the marching they did, the bags they carried, and I was like, oh my God, I remember the horrible, horrible march all the way to our bunks with this bag on my back. I probably wasn't even 100 pounds. I probably weighed 102, carrying this bag that was heavier than me and praying, Lord Jesus, help me make it to the end of the road so I can go to the thing and just listen. Everything they were doing, it took me back so much. They were Army. But but everybody's kind of similar in the thing, and so I was so excited just reading this book and getting flashbacks and like, oh my goodness, it's so wonderful, and the friendships they made and the connection. I have a friend that I met in boot camp, and we still hang out together. Oh my God, it's almost 40 years. Friendship. We actually went to the Tom Jordan cruise in November, so we still hang out, we still do things, and our friendship began from boot camp. So I just love this story. I love the characters in it. I love the friendships. I enjoy the history. The history of it was amazing, and the music. It was just so many different levels inside the book that I really just enjoyed so much. And I just want to know, what made you want to write this story?
It all started with Twitter.
Okay.
I don't know if you can see it, but this picture was on my Twitter timeline.
Oh, okay. It came out clear. Mm-hmm.
It is, for those of you who may not be able to see it, it's a picture of a brigade of black women in World War II era uniform marching in what looks like Europe, and it looks about the 1940s. And I saw that, and I was like, what is that? Because I've been a history geek for most of my life, and, I knew about the Women's Army Corps, and I knew black people were in the Army during World War II, but I'd never seen a picture of black women in uniform before. And when they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, it was just like, what is that? And then immediately Googled black women, World War II, or Army, and boom, the unit popped up. about the 6th AAA Postal Battalion, and they were the only all-black, all-female battalion to be sent over to Europe during World War II. So, I did the little cursory, who they were, what they did, what was going on, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I need to write a historical romance about soldier girl's last night in town before she ships out to war. And so that was the beginning of that. I never thought it would be this book with William R. or anything like that. I thought it was going to be a little historical romance novella that I self-published, and I did it for me because it's the type of thing I would want to read. And then when the book deal became a thing, then I was like, okay, I need to expand this story because that's 80,000 to 100,000 words, and I was planning for like 25, 30,000 words, and it's like, okay, there's a couple things that I could play more with it, so it wasn't just focused on, that it was supposed to be this like whole set piece, 1940s New York, a war's going on, she's in uniform, he's in a suit, that whole romance thing is like, okay, so okay, how did they get to the point of this night and what happens after and things like that. So it was fun. It expanded my research.
I love the fraternization. Because we always do it, even though we're told not to. But your heart doesn't listen to you, to the rules, So I love that that she let herself have it for at least a day. So, how have the readers responded to this? Because it is historical.
Mm-hmm. I have been getting some great, very positive reviews. People have been excited. I've had people just, pop me out of the blue on Twitter and things like that. Like, I saw your book in the airport, and I talked this girl's ear off until she bought it, which was exciting because, again, never thought my book would be in the airport. And when it came out, I was just saying, I was asking people, just send me pictures of everywhere. And come to find out, like, I have a bunch of friends who were not, connected to each other in any way. They were all at the Las Vegas airport at the same time, or the Seattle airport. So it was interesting just to see people's travel patterns, and then, just to be able to see these pictures of it everywhere. I'm still trying to see if I can get. The book is in England and the UK. I'm still trying to get pictures. Did it make it to the airport there, or what does it look like on the shelves there? So hopefully I'll be able to get that picture. I have 2 friends that live there, and I just need to nudge them. Like, will you send me a picture, please? So it's been really positive. I've been surprised just the opportunities to, where I've been asked to speak. I was invited to speak at the American Library Association. I was invited to the Bookmarks Literary Festival in Winston-Salem in September, and got to meet some really cool people there. So it's been a lot of fun. I mean, even there, somebody I went to high school with showed up at the book signing, and I went to high school in New Jersey, so that was like really cool.
Yeah, it's amazing how books connect you with other people. That's exciting. I was looking for it when I went to the library, to the airport. I went to Atlanta, and I was looking. I was like, "Is it here?" But I know it took a lot because you did a lot of research for to put it together and picking the things. And what inspired the friendship of Grace?
Well, once I realized I wasn't writing a romance anymore, I was writing a women's fiction novel, and I really dug deeper into the history of these women and being the first of the first in these situations. I was more interested in the friendships, and it took me back to when I was in college. I went to a women's college. I'm a Spelman College graduate, so just a lot of the vibes, if you will, that when they first came together, were bumping heads or just bonding, like that first night together when they're like, where's everybody from? And they're naming out their cities and things like that. That's something we did. Like, that when we first had our downtime and we're hanging out in the pajamas and the curlers, where are you from? Which high school did you go to? What, it was just people calling out different things, and this is what I'm interested in. And you're like, oh, wow, there's people who are just as geeky as me or interested in this thing. I felt like an outcast. So I thought, I was like, okay, let's play with this. And then my roommate from freshman year, she's like, is this character me? And I'm like, no, but, there's certain situations of us getting used to each other because, I'm the oldest of 2. My roommate was an only child, and so there's certain dynamics there being away from home for the first time. Even with some of my other friends who had, they had never gone to summer camp, and like even at the end of the semester, just to go home for Thanksgiving. They didn't know how to say goodbye or deal with that. And I thought that was interesting. Where I'd gone to camp, I was like, oh, I'll see you in a couple of weeks. It's not that big of a deal. So just to be able to play around with that within this historical setting, and the fact that I've always been fascinated about how did we as a people get these amazing things done back in the 40s and in the past when we didn't have as many opportunities, or there were so many social restrictions on us. And these people, especially these particular women in the Women's Army Corps, were very creative in terms of getting things done. If I can't do it the standard way, well then, I have this whole community that has my back, is watching me, because, if I succeed, we all succeed. So it's like I get to use my resources in a way that other people aren't forced to. So it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I like I told you, it brought back a lot of memories. We did the same thing when we were in boot camp. We all sat around and said where we're from and stuff, because there was a multitude of different races and people from different places, and it was like 4 or 5 of us that were 18, fresh out of high school, but most of the other women were like in their 20s. They had came in to find a husband. That's why I said nothing has changed, and that most of the women went in there, I'm going to get me a man, and that was the mentality in 1985. I went in 85 that they're going to find them a husband, and I'm like, you come in to find a husband? No. I did not come in. And I changed my mom. I called my mom on Fridays, because Fridays was wedding day. So we'd be after boot camp. After boot camp, we went to a special seaman training, and on Friday, I probably went to a wedding every Friday until we left the station, because you had to get married before you could get shipped out together. And so if you weren't married, then you couldn't get duty stations together. So that was the rule. You got to get married first, then you go and get your duty stations. And my mother would say, every time I talked to her, don't you get married? And I'm like, I don't even have a boyfriend, Mom. I'm not getting married. So I thought that was so funny with that. But the other thing is, I was a mail person. Mail was very important when you were in the military, because back then we didn't have cell phones, so you couldn't call people, and it was rare to to be able to call. So mail was the most important thing. We usually got mail on Sunday, and so I loved that that was what they were doing, was getting the mail, and they knew how important it was to get that mail out to people. No matter what it is, you still got to get that mail out to them. So I thought that was really important, that was their job that they were doing in the military. I love that. I love the music too, and her sneaking off to the little places, and it's interesting. Even up now, I was talking about how we're learning now as parents to listen to our children on what they want to do with their lives. Even back then. You did what your parents said. This is how your life is going to be. This is what you're going to do. And it's, and even, in the African American community, they wanted you to be just successful people, and they thought she was going to be this big musician and do different things. And she wanted to be a musician, but not the type they wanted her to be, and that forced her to go to another direction, and I was like, man, it's just so many parallels that's to now compared to back then, and that's what I loved about the stories.
And it was interesting while I was writing it, because, that was like the summer of 2020 when all the riots and everything were happening, and they were calling the police on black people for existing, and so while I was researching, I was able to put that in the book, that, some people are like, this book, seems too good to be true, or it seems to be too modern. And I'm like, everything that's in there is happened to somebody in the past. It might not have been my characters. So yes, they got the police called on them for being black in uniform and things like that.
Oh yeah. Oh my God, that was hilarious. I was like, wow, really? Seriously?
Yeah.
We still
that actually really happened, yeah.
Still happening. But it's sad, because they always say history repeats itself. And the reason it repeats itself is because you don't know. You think you don't know. And somebody's going to tell you that that's modern, when you're like, this is the 40s. This is 2022.
75 years,
what's modern about, still being harassed, So I thought that was good. I have a fun question for you. If you could cast your book in a movie, who would you cast as these ladies?
Grace Kiki Palmer and Eliza Kyla Pratt.
Who you say her name again for Liza? Who?
Kyla Pratt.
Oh, Kyla Pratt. Oh, okay. I could see Kiki. She could be able.
I spent a lot of time like with Grace's mannerisms and her little nervous tics. I was thinking about Akilah and the Bee.
Oh, okay.
Like when she used to tap her leg when she was trying to remember how to spell things. It's like so Kiki was heavy in my mind when I was writing the book.
Oh, that's good. I can't picture them. I haven't pictured anybody in my head, but I wondered if you had pictured, because sometimes as writers we picture people in our heads. And Kyla, she's been doing. Do you watch the show Cat something?
Call Me Cat.
Yeah.
I'm behind, but it's on my DVR.
I'm behind too, but it's a cute little show. But I like the I can't think of her name. I always call her Blossom.
Maya Blade.
Maya, yeah, she actually had the last time I saw her, she had the Blossom people on there, the whole crew.
Oh, she did. Oh,
yeah, so it was a cute little show with them, and she was on there with them. I was like, oh my gosh, it's so many years. So, oh my God, I'm telling my age a lot.
I know who Blossom is.
Yeah, so I thought that was cool.
For Jonathan and like Noah, it changes because I could see anybody in those roles, like John Boyega, what's his name from Queen Sugar, Kofi.
Oh,
Kofi
that's a voice.
Syrup. I can see him.
No, I can't see him. He too.
You can't see him in a suit. One of them.
I can see him, but I would think he would be too young. Maybe I would think he would be like older a little bit.
A little bit. Older, well, remember he was 21 when he started Queen Sugar, so it's been a couple of years. But I think he could pull it off if he wanted to. But
yeah,
like
all the time, you might be able to pull it off. Yeah.
Now, one thing I'm hoping is that if Lenny Kravitz is willing to cut off his locks, he play one of the fathers. He play Grace's dad. And I'll definitely be on set that day.
Yeah, I can see that. You know, it was interesting. Both sets of parents didn't want them to go to the military. Well, the mother was for what's her? I keep wanting to say her name, Alexis. It's not Alexa. Eliza mom was okay with it, but the daddy was like, You know, he was like, my mother, she wanted to go into the military, and her father told her, no. He was like, no, hey, you will not go into the military. So when I went in, she thought that was the best thing going. It was for me to do the military. And I was like, so when I got out, she was like really disappointed because she thought I was going to do 20 years. And I was like, no, the military is not good for a single woman. You know, and she's like, oh, you should stay in, you know. And I'm glad I got out because I was able to have my family, you know. If I had stayed in, men don't travel. Women travel with men, but men don't travel with women. So I knew that it was going to be a hard sell to get some man to go. I wanted to go overseas, so they weren't even trying to leave Missouri. So, you know, my friend I was telling you about, she stayed in. She did 20 years. She stayed in, and but she sacrificed her family. She didn't have a family, so she always tells me that. You got the family, and I didn't get the family. And I'm like, well, you got the 20 years, you got the experience, you know. She got to do she did a lot of traveling, you know, which is what I went into the military for to do, was to travel. So, you know. What was your biggest distraction while you were writing? What stopped you from writing sometimes?
Oh, my God. Well, let's see. I got the deal. When the deal happened, I had a 1-year-old.
Yeah.
In the process of writing my book, my mom's final illness, and she passed away. That was interesting. I was actually my most productive in the month leading up to, because that's when I realized, oh, wait, this is happening, and I was behind. I was like, well, while I know I'm in my right mind, if you will, let me get as far as I can. I told my editor, I was like, I'll just I'm just going to do as much as I can, and then we'll see what after looks like. So that was an interesting experience. I actually wrote not to spoil anything, but there's some death in the book. I had to write that right after, and it was interesting because I always laugh. I say God has a sense of humor, because I was able to at least channel some of those feelings and experiences right into that. So it, I was able to process that way. I was doing my last revisions the day of the insurrection at the Capitol. It was weird. It was weird. You know, there's a certain point, it's like, do you expect, what? She was like, when do you think you can get this done? I'm like, it depends on what happens between now and the inauguration. I don't know. I was like, how about this? I'm going to do my work first thing in the morning before stuff can happen. So those are the type of distractions I had going on, and obviously, I forget where were we in the pandemic? Everything's mushed together. Learning how to work, you know, as we all did, how to work, you know, go from working in an office to at home. Because before, in the office, I would get my pages done first thing in the morning. You know, when people were going around drinking coffee and saying, how was your day? I was getting a couple pages in there at lunch. And then, you know, when you pack up for work, I'd get a couple more in and then go home and be mommy and wife and everything. So it was like, you know, being 20, now not having that luxury, that was interesting. Excuse me. So those were some of the challenges I had with that. Just
that was good though, because you share, life happens, and a lot of people don't understand that with writing. That you got to when you're telling a person you're going to meet a deadline, you need to throw in 2 or 3 months for that life happens, because you don't know if somebody's going to die while you're writing, and can you handle it afterwards, you know, or you're going to be put on furlough for the rest of your time, you know, and go home with all the kids driving you crazy. You won't have to, because I was telling somebody, I said, I did not write for 2020 at all. Nothing new came out of my head other than nonfiction stuff. I wrote a bunch of articles, blogging, stuff like that, but the characters were not talking to me at all. And I kept trying to figure out what is going on with me. Well, I don't write at home. I'm like you. I write at work. So I would stay an hour after work while everybody's gone, is quiet. I would write for an hour, and then I would go home and become mom, you know, wife or whatever. And so I'm at home, and they're like, you at home? You got time to write? And I'm like, no.
Not really.
My brain is not working. It's not working like that. You know, he kept saying, you don't write here. What are you talking about?
So I actually have an office, you know, pay rent for it and everything, like a co-working space or whatever. And so when I at least have a space I know I can go to. So sometimes, you know, even doing the day job, I can kind of simulate what I used to do. You know, now it's Omicron. Like, I only go in there on the weekends now, walk in with the mask, spray it down just in case. Because it's an old building, so it's like, who knows what the ventilation's doing. So I have to spray it down and then go in there. And it's good because it's focused. It's not like I want to sit there and dawdle anymore. So get it done and get out. I've written in my car, and my daughter was like, Mom, you going to go in the car with your computer again? I'm like, yeah.
I've done that too. I did that when I did a podcast, and my son was just screaming and kept screaming, and I was like, I got to get this podcast put up. So I went in the car and prayed that none of the dogs barked while I was out there. Got the podcast done. You know, you got to do what you have to do.
And oddly enough, I found out my most productive place is in the car shops. So if I'm getting my oil changed, if I'm getting my tires done, I've knocked out like 2,000 words in an hour there. I don't know what it is. And it's like, I can't do that anymore. It's like, let me just go get my tires rotated. No, I can't do that anymore. But so that's one of the hard things. Is like, that was one of my good, you know, spots I know.
I understand so well. We went, my husband went to get a checkup for something. He had COVID. He went to get checkup. And it turned into it was supposed to be 15 minutes, and they kept him in there for 2 hours. I'm sitting there going, my phone died. That's how long I've been there. My phone died. So I went into the bathroom, and they had white paper towels. So I pulled out 4 strips of white paper towels, folded them in half, and wrote out a story while I was sitting there. And my husband goes, what is that? Did you write on some paper? Some paper towels? I'm like, this, as a matter of fact, that was the beginning of my Kindlevella. I did the first 3 chapters of the Kindlevella sitting and waiting for 2 hours with at the doctor's office. So
I finally downloaded like Word or something on my phone and just like
Well, my phone was dead. That's the only reason I had to. I was like, usually I have all my stuff packed in my purse with charger and all that stuff. And we were rushing, and I came out the house, and he's like, it ain't gonna be that long. You don't need a charger. Like 2 hours sitting here. My phone dead. I had a charger in my car, but I couldn't go to the car because I couldn't call him and tell him I'm going to the car. So I was like, okay, let's sit here and write. I was like, you know what? I got a pen, get some paper, let's go. So sometimes that's the most productive time when you're not expecting it, you know. So that's good. My next question for you is, what did you hope to accomplish with this book?
A bunch of things. One, to more awareness for the 6888, just to know, for people to know that they were there, what they did, and it wasn't just sorting the mail, as you said. Mail, especially back then when we didn't have cell phones and social media and things like that, that was your lifeline to home. And they were those soldiers were experiencing some very challenging things. If you're familiar with World War II history, you know the Battle of the Bulge, the winter of 1944 were really hard on U.S. soldiers, and that's when the mail stopped coming. You know, for a variety of reasons. And so the 6888 was not even the first team or group to be sent to tackle that challenge. They were the second or third. And they basically gave the black women the impossible task and gave them 6 months to do it. They did it in 3 months. So, just to let that be known. And also just their experiences, because I wish I had known their story when I first came out of college and had my first job in the workplace. Because, things happen, and you're like, was that a racism? Are you reacting to me because of the way I look or because I'm female or things like that, and not knowing how to react, and sometimes you get gaslit and things like that, and just to see that they experienced similar things and the way they addressed it and dealt with it, it would have, it's just like, okay, maybe not less alone, because in my situation I was like, I had to move away from home, things like that, similar to them. I wanted to talk about what to do when the perfect plan for your life goes left. And you're like, how did this happen and what do I do? That happened to me after that first job where I was like, what's going on, and quit. And I'm like, all right, now what?
Right.
I was playing around with the themes of what happens when you meet the perfect guy for you on the absolutely worst day to meet him. Because for those who read the book, what if Jonathan and Eliza had met the day before or the day after or even 2 weeks later or a year later, their journey might have been a lot different and a lot smoother, and happily ever after might have happened, a lot easier for them. So I wanted to play around with that, and what do you do when you have a goal and this guy is there and he's kind of, if you invite him in your life, it could make everything implode, but he's a really good guy, so just playing around with that.
Yeah, so I felt for them so, and because he fell hard, and she was like, dude, I got things to do.
Yeah, so like, I like you, and I don't want to like you, and why are you bothering me right now?
Yep, I understand that. So you published your book. Your book came out really smack dab into the COVID time frame. How did that affect you with doing your promotion and stuff?
I think it actually made it easier because I still have the day job, and I was able to appear in a lot of places, because had it not been COVID and us, Zoom being our new best friend, I don't know if I would have been able to do all the travel that would have been required of me. I'm kind of bummed because with the when I was at American Library Association, I was a featured speaker, and I was bummed out because when I saw who the other featured speakers were, I was like, I could have been in the green room with Stanley Tucci. Do you understand how that would have been like one of the coolest things that ever happened to me, and things like that. But I think it worked out given my personal circumstances at the time. It's hard for me to, if I leave and overnight, my daughter freaks out. So it was like, it was good for her. But even still, she's like, "Do you have another interview, Mom?" She's like over it at this point. Luckily, it's calmed down since the initial release, because it was just like, "Okay, Mommy." So I think it worked. I'll be interested with the next book what it's going to look like, because hopefully we should be in the new normal by then, and I think they do want me to go out on the road, so we'll see. But I have had some in-person appearances locally at independent bookstores, and like I said, I went to the Literary Festival in Winston-Salem. They were incredible in terms of their COVID precautions and things like that, and I felt comfortable the whole time. And then my book signings that I have had have been outside or spaced out and things like that, so it's been good.
That's good. That's good, because sometimes I know a lot of people were releasing and they were just devastated that they weren't going to be able to do the things that they thought they were going to do. You know, this is like, we got to pivot and improvise, do something different, so that's good. I attended a couple of your virtual things. So, so no, it was cool. It was. I know you probably wanted to be live, but I was like, I'm glad it's not, because I can see her. So it's cool.
The folks back home in Jersey used to like, when are you coming home to sign books? And I'm like, I need to go home for the research on the next book, and it's COVID. It's not me. I was like, I would have been home. The cool thing was that the public library from my hometown found me. So we did a thing for Veterans Day, and then now I'm going to do something for their African American reading next month. So it's been cool to reconnect back home like that. My fifth grade gym teacher showed up for that. That was really cool.
That's kind of cool. That is cool. So you went right into one of the questions I was going to ask you. So what are you working on now? Can you talk about it?
Yeah, it's been announced. I am going to write about her. She is the only woman who has been inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Her name is Effa Manley. My short version of the story is she was a girl with a dream and a baseball team. If you're aware, I need to come visit you in Missouri, too. She was a co-owner of a Negro Leagues team.
Okay.
She was very ambitious, and she thought she was going to make her mark in the world through civil rights and running her own hat shop, and she wound up co-owning and being a general manager for a Negro Leagues team, the Newark Eagles. And in that role, she basically, the men tried it, and she did not put up with it. And we're talking about the 1930s and the 1940s. And she was doing things that you don't necessarily think of when you think of women in the 30s and the 40s. And no one knows for sure her racial makeup. She could have been a black woman who was raised in a black family and lived her life as a black woman, or she could have been of mixed race and just very, very fair. She did do some passing, but she was very adamant about, I am a black woman, I live in Harlem. She spearheaded, she was like always the secretary for the NAACP. She had anti-lynching fundraisers at the ballpark, things like she was unapologetically black, if you will, which I also thought was interesting because, you always hear about, back then, woe is me, why am I a negress, I just want to be white type thing and let me pass and forget everything, and she did not do that. And she was actually the first Negro League owner to be compensated for her players when they drafted them into the major leagues. Because with Jackie Robinson, there was some dispute whether or not he was under contract with the Kansas City Monarchs. They tried to get Don Newcomb from her, and she put up a fight, so they dropped him, and she was the very first owner to be paid. So
that's cool. Then you definitely have to go to Kansas City to see the Negro League. There, it's fantastic. I'm trying to picture if they had her there, so I'm like, I don't remember them talking about a woman in the Negro League museum. So,
well, there were 4 female players, and they tend to talk about them before.
Yeah, I think they talked about the players, but I don't think they talked about the owners, the female owners. So maybe they might not know about her.
Well, in October, I did get to go to Cooperstown. She kept the scrapbook during her baseball years, and it was there, so I got to commune with Effa and see, what articles she chose to keep. She made little notes in the margins, like, this story is all wrong, and this is what happened, and, she had, like, these interesting quotes about love here and there. And it was just like, okay, it took me a while to kind of figure out why is, what's up with this, Effa? So it was a good trip. But she's mentioned, because they have like a section for the Negro League, so I think she pops up in there, and they have another section for women in baseball. And I don't think she's mentioned as much. You have to be looking for her to see her in both of those. And it's like a blip. So I hadn't heard of her because I was like, I need to do a Negro Leagues book. And I was like, let me look at, find out about these players. And when I put women Negro Leagues, I discovered there was actually 4 women who owned Negro League teams, and one of those women was actually she played for Indianapolis, and she owned the Detroit Stars.
Oh,
She's the only one who's still alive, and I can't find her. I was like, I can't find anybody who knows her. I'm like, I want to talk to her.
I wonder if she's still in Detroit. That would be cool. Somebody up there might know.
She's in Grand Rapids. If she was in Detroit, I could probably find her because I have a lot of people in Detroit. But I only know like one person from Grand Rapids, and they're like, no, I don't know Miss Forbes. So if anybody knows Minnie Forbes, I would love to talk to her.
Somebody knows her.
Somebody does.
Tell her we want to do her story.
Usually my network is pretty good, but she has been elusive.
That's interesting.
Yeah, but didn't know.
Yeah, that's kind of cool though, because I know you said you wanted to do a Negro League one time, so that's I'm just amazed that you had these ideas in your head and now they're coming to books, and I think that's the best thing about being a writer is you think of these things and then finally it's a book. That's just amazing to me. So I'm excited. I'm going to get that one too. I want to read that one. I'm a baseball girl over here, so that's definitely be. As a matter of fact, yes. I've been looking forward to reading that one too.
And she was a huge baseball fan too, so it'll be interesting because her story kind of parallels a lot of my experiences. So I'm really excited to write about this.
Oh, that's good. It's good when you can find you don't have to make up a lot of stuff. Use the little history and put it inside there, and it's interesting because our society is more about men and what they do. You don't really talk about the women. The women do some stuff. I know I watched Venus and Serena's story, King Richard, and I said I understand why they called it King Richard, but they should have put the mama's name up in there too. Because she was who kicked his butt to get to do what you got to do, and I said something, and they honored their father because he was there, but their mother, she was out there. That's who they were practicing with. That's who Serena was. Serena was practicing with was the mother. She was out there playing with her. She was doing it. Sometimes I think that they, especially in the African American community, we miss the woman's side. They don't tell the woman's side some stories. So I'm glad that you are able to share some stories and show that we rocked, even in the 30s and 40s.
We did.
We still rock, but we rocked back then, and we rocked back in probably in caveman time too. We just destroyed and told.
Yeah, what we're getting in popular culture, or at least before, because now we're starting to get more interesting stories. It wasn't just, nobody knows the trouble I've seen, and, I was tired, and my life is horrible. And it gets even more horrible, and then I finally get one moment of joy, and the movie ends, and I die. It wasn't that at all. There's a little bit more going to it. Because even with, like, the Emmett Till story, in my head, I always had this image of his uncle being, just this guy from Mississippi and broke down and shucking and jiving, and that wasn't just based on what the information we were given. And in that movie or that portrayal, it's not like that at all. He did what he had to do. When he was in his space, he was one person. When he was interacting with others, he knew the dangers, and he just didn't look him in the eye. But it wasn't that.
And he just played the game. He knew how to play the game to stay alive.
Yeah.
Back then, that story there I had because I didn't know that, you hear different things through history. I didn't realize that they told her that he was missing. I thought she found out he was dead at the same time, at the same time. I didn't know he was missing for a couple of days before they found him. Like, I didn't know that they found him like that. I thought they found him dead. I didn't realize he had been in the water for that long and stuff. And I said, that's the thing about history is so many people tell different versions of stuff, and a lot of people were like, well, why are they telling this story? And I said, the African American people don't need to see this. We know this history. It's the other people that don't know about it. That, if it flew over their head, it wasn't important to them. It wasn't in their bubble. And they're like, why do we keep telling the same stories? Oh, because obviously somebody's not listening because we're having the same thing. That young man went down there and got played by his cousins, because that's what they did. They played and tricked him. Which kids do. They tricked him, but he didn't
they were
know
just
the
kids
system.
being kids.
Yeah, they're just being kids, and he didn't know the system. And I was like, oh my God! But the thing about it was, they should have told the daddy. If they had told the daddy, he would have been alive, because he would have sent his butt home.
Yeah,
He was like they ran up out of there as soon as the next day, he would have been doing the same thing. But they didn't tell their father, and it's like, come on, you know your history, you know what goes on down here.
But they were 14-year-old boys being 14-year-old boys. Not to say it was wrong or right, but you don't make.
Yeah, I look at my son and I'm thinking, because he's 15, and I'm like, he's 15, and that's what the man.
And he just turned 15.
The Jet magazine guy kept telling her, you got to keep telling people that he was 14 years old. This is a little boy. He's not a grown man whistling at a little woman. This is a young man, a young boy, a little boy. Just trying, having fun. They were just having fun, teasing each other. So the reason you do these stories is because someone needs to know. Nobody knew that. Somebody probably didn't know that they had black women in the army.
Well, with me, because I know we've had conversations. I can go off the deep end in my geekery. I didn't. It took me seeing the picture to be like, whoa, because it just didn't click. And it wasn't even that people necessarily forgot about them. They were having their reunions all the way up until the 90s, I think, of black women from the World War II. I found out like 2 weeks after I turned in my book, my grandfather's oldest sister was an officer in the WAC in 1943. And she actually was alive until, like, I think in the early 90s. And I never met her. And I had, just because of circumstances, it wasn't mentioned. I didn't know. So it's just as simple as that. While I was working on this, I found out. Well, I knew my grandfather was. My dad always said my grandfather's one of the first black firefighters in New York City, and he was one of the founders of the Black Fraternal Society for those firefighters, the Vulcan Society. And I didn't think anything of it. And I came across a book where someone did the history of black firefighters in New York City, and I'm flipping through the book. First thing I did is I looked in the index and I didn't see our name there, so I was like, okay, whatever. He must have been a rank and file guy, and that's okay. And I was like, let me just read the section of when he would have been there, just to get a sense of what his life like. And while I'm reading it, I see something about Melvin Anderson led a contingent to go talk to Mayor LaGuardia about X, Y, and Z, the president of the organization. I'm like, Melvin Anderson. I'm like, what are the odds that there's a Melvin Anderson and a Melvin Alderson? And I went and I dug.
Wrong name.
Yeah, that one letter, and I was like, oh wait, he was the president. He was one of the founders. He was one of the presidents. He was one of the trustees. And then I went and I contacted the author just to be like, hey, if you ever do another printing, this typo needs to be fixed. And just I started, emailing back and forth. I was like, who would have they interacted with? He's like, oh, 1944. Oh, they would have been like, neck and neck with Thurgood Marshall and A. Philip Randolph, and because it's more labor stuff. And I'm like, oh my God. and then I started looking at it, and I could see what I knew of, just like in life, when they moved to certain places and certain things happening. And I was telling the guy, I'm like, well, here, let me fill in some blanks right here. This happened, and this is, I know my grandparents were here doing this or whatever. So I gave my dad the book, and he was like, he never mentioned that. He was in it that deep. His last brother was still alive, and I sent a copy of the book to my cousins, and Uncle Tony was like, I didn't know. He was a little younger, but it was just and even something like that, I connected with one guy with the Vulcan Society. He's like, oh my God, do you have a picture of your grandfather? I was like, yeah, I have a picture of him in his uniform, his dressing uniform. And I showed it to him, and he was like, oh my God, that was and it was just he didn't mention it. And once I realized some of the experiences he had as one of those early guys, because he wasn't number one or anything like that. They were hire them in batches, so he was in the batch of maybe number 20 to number 30. But he would have been going through the fire academy in the late 30s by himself. He would have been the one guy or two black guys. So who knows? Mm-hmm. And just the things that they were hazing them, and there were Jim Crow beds when they would spend overnight and things like that. I was getting physically ready to fight reading it, and I'm like, I understand why you didn't tell us. I wish you had, but I understand.
Well, that's the third book right there. You got to tell his story.
My dad was like, I know you don't put my parents in this book.
Give it a happy ending instead of sad stuff. But he did have a happy ending because you're here. So something came out of it,
Yeah, And you know,
They got
if you think
kids and
about
stuff.
yeah, and he's like, and you know, I knew my grandfather passed when I was 14, and I remember him very well. And you know, he was just laid back and whatever. And it's like, wow, he was fighting, and the fact he was fighting fires. That's kind of cool.
Wow. Yeah, because when I know of like 4 or 5 black firefighters, and
Mm-hmm.
they went through a lot of stuff,
They still
but
do, yeah.
and can you imagine back then when you're the only one, they don't really talk about that history stuff. You talk about even with my parents and things, the things that they went through, because they were going through the history that we talk
Yeah.
about now,
Mm-hmm.
in the 60s and stuff, and like my mother used to say about Martin Luther King. Oh, my grandmother said that he was a troublemaker, and so we didn't talk about him.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, wow, that's what
Yeah.
your grandmother thought of. She said, well, whenever he did stuff, he made trouble. And I was like, well, yeah, because he was trying to change things, but that her grandmother was from that generation that they didn't want to change things, they just want to let it flow, keep it steady, and that's what I love about history is that, so many people don't talk about stuff, and you don't get the history, you don't know the different things, and our generation is taught, you don't talk about that, you don't talk about, like he died without telling he was that was important history, he made history, being a firefighter, and we don't even talk about that, and then somebody else comes and tells the history, and then spells his name wrong,
Yeah.
get it right.
It's a common error, so I was like, he was, because the guy was apologetic. I'm like, it happens all the time. Just if you have a chance to do another revision, just know that in case somebody was looking for him and doesn't know to figure it out. Yeah, because I remember a couple of years ago, it was my auntie's 100th birthday party, and afterwards we were at the house, and it was my dad and his first cousins, and they were sitting there just talking, and just in the process of them talking, they were graduating from high school and going to college in the late 60s, and so they were talking about how their at least the cousins, their parents were pressuring them to go to white schools for the movement. And I was like, wait a minute, you don't think about that. You're like, oh wait, you're not like Ruby Bridges, but you were still like in that, and because my dad, he did go to a white school in Chicago, and and a different time my sister was asking him questions, and he, just different things. He was like, oh, my roommate didn't speak to me his freshman year, and afterwards I was like, oh, wait a minute, it's because you were black, right? And it was like, oh wow, and my dad being a football player, he's like, I just wasn't in the room and out socializing. That was my first assumption. Actually, he was deaf. His roommate was deaf, but then he probably was paired with the deaf guy because he was black. But it's just like, that's why your roommate. Wow. But it's just like little things are like my other his cousin. She was like, she grew up in Mississippi, and they had her go to a white school in Mississippi in the late 60s. And I think after the first semester a year, she transferred to Fisk. I'm like, wait a minute, you were like one of those. What you were a first, and things like that. So it was like really just to sit at the feet of people, or even like when you remember when the Temptations miniseries came out.
Mm-hmm.
I just happened to be in the house of some old heads who grew up in Detroit at that time, and that was a history lesson. Just sitting at the feet of these people watching it, and they're like, "That's not what happened. I'm gonna tell you what happened." Just tell them the gossip, and I'm sitting there like, "Oh my God."
Right, because they lived it.
Because I ain't get, it's all secondhand. I don't know what I'm talking about. But you have to be that person when the old heads, even if you're an old head like us, so when our old heads are sitting around gossiping, you need to be sitting there. And the fact that I'm a history geek and I was able to piece things together, like at my Uncle Tony, who I mentioned, we were at a funeral for his other brother that his second to last brother, and he was sitting there talking about, he's a Korea vet, so he always wore his vet stuff, and while we were having dinner somewhere, so people kept walking up, thank you for your service and things, and then it's just like, oh, you're in Korea, when did you join? And he was like, oh, I just missed World War II. I enlisted in like the spring of 1946, and then he went to Korea, and I was sitting there, I'm like, wait a minute, that means you were in the Army before desegregation, during desegregation, and after. And everyone looked at me like, what? And I'm like, he he lived through this historical moment. He's the first, and I just, I asked, being sensitive to the situation, I was like, what was that like? I mean, you saw it all, and he's just like, them people were mean and mean for no reason, and I didn't push after that. But it was just really interesting. Just if you just ask, if you just have a little bit of knowledge, connect the dots, and just ask, you'd be surprised. Like your relatives, the people that you are right there that you can talk to, have lived this history.
Yeah, it's interesting because you don't ask. Like my uncle, he served in the military in the '60s, so he never talked about it. So I saw pictures, so I just assumed he went to Vietnam. And he goes, "Girl, I went to Tennessee." I was like, "What?" He's like, "I was in Vietnam." The time frame, he said, but he went to Tennessee. He got stationed in Tennessee, and they were going to go to Vietnam, and then they pulled him back home, so he didn't get to go. And so I was, telling my cousin, all my family thought he went to Vietnam, and I'm like, I said we just assumed, and nobody ever asked him what he did, and I just happened one day to ask him. I was like, well, what was Vietnam like? What did you do there? And he's like, Vietnam, Vietnam.
Yeah. And that's why he's a Vietnam era vet.
Yeah, that's what. Look, he took all his benefits. He wasn't playing.
Yep.
And I was like, oh my God! But I just remember as a little girl looking through the family photos and seeing him, and he was by he'd be by the big old trucks and things and everything. And I knew he went into the military during that time frame, but nobody had ever asked him. And that's the thing, you don't, if they don't talk about it, you're not gonna ask. Because my grandfather was in the military. Him and my uncle both are in the military cemetery, but I don't think anybody knows what he did in the military or whatever. Because when my mom wanted to go, he was adamant, nope, you're not going. But I know he did 4 years. He did 4 years because that's how he got to go to the cemetery, And so I was like, what did he do? And my mom and them family was very secretive. They held nothing. It was like everybody went to their graves with all their information, and so I try to get my kids, ask questions. What do you want to know, But,
and you do, because I remember growing up on my mom's side, they all talked about Big Aunt Florence reverently. Big Aunt Florence was like this big deal, and she was like a fourth. And it took everybody dying for me to find out Big Aunt Florence was like a major suffragette in the early 1900s. And she founded a church, an AME church, when nobody wanted a black female pastor. No. She was I did some, I have an account with newspaper.com to do the research for this current book. And so when I'm bored, I'll go and look up family member names. And there's a moment in time where Big Aunt Florence and Mary Church Terrell are flaming each other in the newspaper, and I'm sitting there like, oh my God. Cause you know how polite black women like to go in on each other so politely, and I'm just sitting there like, they reading each other for filth. Oh my God. And it was just like, I'm like, wait a minute. And then, luckily, once I knew her name and made that connection, she's very well documented, and I was able to find my family history, and that's how I found out that branch of the family was free 2 generations before emancipation in South Carolina. And I was like, oh.
Wow.
And I think if I can connect this one enslaved woman that I found who has the right names, because you know how they like to reuse names, I need to find either her child and her grandchild to connect. And if so, I can trace my family back in the United States back to 1766.
Wow.
And had I known to ask the questions, I probably could have filled in some of these. I was sitting there once everybody's gone, I'm like, okay.
Oh, I know when my mom, my mother's father's sister died, and my aunt got a copy of her obituary, and her obituary was a tree.
Yep.
It was, and I'm over here going, oh my God, and she had this, and who, because my mother's mother died when she was 9. And I didn't see a picture of my mother's mother until I was 27. one of our cousins found a picture of my mother and my grandfather together, and she was pregnant with my mom. And that's the only picture I have of my grandmother. So I never knew what my grandmother looked like. So, you know, it was really wild. And then so when I got this obituary, it had who granddaddy was, who his aunt mother was, who his great-great-mother. It just went up this, and I was like, my sister's like, why are you so fascinated by it? I said, because we don't know none of that stuff, you know? And it's just,
and if you don't know,
cool.
You believed a lot, oh, we just came from slaves. And, you know, it's like, oh, wait, we were free. And
everybody didn't come from slaves. Not everybody. You know, a lot of people came here free, you know, and the reason you don't know about it is they just don't talk. But we, you know, if you can do your history, you know, you go, like my husband's side, they came from, their great-grandfather was white. But he married a black woman, and their line came down. But they had that. They got a little book with all their history and all the way up to why they are Hoffman. Because my husband's last name is Hoffman, which you know is a white man's name. You know, it's like. And so we went to a family reunion one time, and I'm like, this is the book that we have, and I'm like, and my husband went phased it out. I'm like, oh my God, you traced it all the way back to who the Hoffman was, you know, and they're like, oh, and the kids on his side, his brothers, they didn't care. But I was like freaking out. So,
the cool thing was, through the census records, I was able to figure out that we had runaway slaves in the family. Because they kept where they were born kept changing. Like, oh, I was born in Maryland. No, I was born in Massachusetts. And you could see where, like, in the 1850 census, they were in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, which is right on the Mason-Dixon line, saying that they were born in Maryland. And then a couple months later, they show up on the 1850 census in Boston, talking about we were born in Massachusetts. And I'm like, what? You know, I was confused. I'm like, are you the same people? I was like, oh, wait, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. And I looked up the dates. And they were literally there, and then the slave catchers can really get us now, and they left and changed their whole story.
They just moved somewhere else, but they were the same people.
So it's just like, it's fascinating. You just don't know. You just like, oh, we just got free one day. It's like, no, it's more dynamic than that sometimes.
And I'm thankful for the censors, because that's really the only documentation that we have for anything. Even when, you know, they're looking at stuff, even during the slavery time, they had how old that person was, and that's how you knew who that person was, because they didn't put their names on the census. But they like, we got these many people that we own, you know, but they live here, you know. So the census is really interesting.
I was able to find the free black people who owned a slave. I was able to figure it out. And I was just like, she only owned one slave, though. And so that's all, you know, they didn't list names or ages, so that I'm like, okay.
It probably was somebody that was some kin to her, because that's usually when they own them, so they could, because you couldn't be free. You couldn't be a free slave. So you had to stay, you know. I learned that on the PBS channel.
Everybody's favorite show.
Right. Well, we have come to the end. This has been fun. I enjoyed chatting with you today. Learned so much stuff. I want to thank you for being here today. Can you tell us how the listeners can contact you online?
Sure. You can find me on Instagram and or Twitter under the handle of @Kaia Writes, KAIAWRITES, and then I'm on Facebook as Kaia Alderson Author.
All right. And I've been saying your name wrong for 50 million years. It's Kaia?
Yes, Kaia.
Kaia. Well, I call you Kaia. Kaia. I like that better. Thank you. I want to thank our sponsors, Building Your Readership by LaShaunda Hoffman. Check the show notes for the link to purchase. I want to thank our listeners our viewers. We have viewers today for taking time to watch this podcast. I have 3 questions for you. Did you learn something from this episode? If you did, please share the podcast with your community. Would you like to be a guest on the next episode? Contact me at onesormeg@gmail.com. And my last question, have you promoted your book or business today? If you haven't, go showcase those wings. Tell somebody about your book. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You guys have a great evening or day or morning or whatever it's going to be while you're watching this replay. This is LaShaunda Hoffman, and I will see you on the next.